the brain that gives a sense of a coherent self and readies us for action. Mindful attention, with no object, is in the dorsal lateral area of the cortex that receives new information and thereby reorganizes or reconstitutes itself. We need both kinds of attention in order to activate our full powers. Fear, as we heard previously, can lead to flight or freezing. Mindfulness offers an alternative of just sitting. To grant hospitality to fear and feeling is to find freedom in them. For instance, mindfulness allows us to feel grief for a loss and to get through it into the open, free space beyond it in which we move on with our lives. Awareness in mindfulness is like a mirror. It shows us reality without sugarcoating or minimizing it. As we become comfortable with reality, we automatically release our fears. With freedom from fear, we can reinvest our energies in a whole new project, staying aware of the unitive consciousness that's our true nature. Our fear-stress is now useful agitation that helps us face whatever life has hurled in our direction. Finally, we also give ourselves credit for the radical move we've made. Instead of simply remaining at the mercy of fear, we have engaged in a practice that protests against its grip. The mindfulness practice is radical because we thereby let our whole experience belong. When we allowed ourselves to feel our fear rather than medicate, cosmeticize, or forsake it, we made room for ourselves wholly. Indeed, though we remain unfinished, we are always whole. Each of us humans is like one of the great medieval cathedrals, ever being refurbished, reinforced, and expanded, continuously under construction, yet fully operational throughout the process. We are always in need of work, and yet entirely perfect. We're not frightened by the fearsome gargoyles that sit on us, the demons and distresses that seem to overwhelm us. We are equipped with steeples that uplift us. Like all medieval cathedrals, we are a felicitous combination of what our life has historically been and what has become possible for us thanks to today's construction skills. This is the source of our enduring and indomitable optimism. The certainty that nothing can happen to us that does not belong to us in our innermost being is the foundation of fearlessness. Lama Anagarika Govinda. Practice. Getting over our fears. Letting go of ego is letting go of fear, because fear is what egotism thrives on. Our old brain amygdala is on the lookout for any sign of a threat. We can learn to calm our brain and undo our fear-based mindset. Then, when an ego attitude arises, we can notice it, redirect it, and apologize if one of its bullets has hit a bystander. We don't have to let go of ego as our personality or identity. We let go of the egotistical mindset that can distort it and thereby diminish our opportunities for love. Then ego no longer holds us hostage in the dungeon of dread. We can learn to accept reality fearlessly, to let vulnerable love happen in and between us, finally, to be open without a sense of impending danger. Fear thrives on obsession with what might happen. We become engrossed in the obsession rather than managing our fear. We can practice dealing with fear rather than being swept away by it. We do not have to be paralyzed by fear. We can relate to it. Here's a practice involving 4 A's: admit, allow, act, affirm, that can help us handle fear. 1. We admit to ourselves, and if appropriate, to someone we trust, that we are afraid and what we're afraid of. This includes admitting if we're pretending to look unafraid when we actually are. Letting go of pretension is indeed a great step away from fear. 2. We allow this feeling to have its full career, emotionally and physically. When fear strikes us, we stop in our tracks and let the fear pass through us without interruption. When we stay with any feeling, the lively energy bound up in it begins to move. Then the fear transforms from a stubborn mule into a winged steed, and we start moving too. This happens as the fear no longer has a grip on us. The fear begins to turn into excitement, the energy it was stifling. As we hold, cradle, and stay with our fear or any feeling, we also become our own companion. We're not abandoning ourselves, but accompanying ourselves. This increases our skill in self-caring. By a wonderful paradox, when we put up no resistance, a feeling opens rather than overwhelms us. We relate to our fear rather than be possessed by it. As part of the practice, we place our hand over the part of our body where we feel the fear viscerally. We hold it there until we feel its warmth. After doing this for as long as is comfortable, we release our hand, swinging it toward the sky or down toward the ground. This symbolizes sending our fear back into nature to dissolve it. 3. We then, or soon, act in such a way that fear no longer has the power to freeze, stop, or force our behavior. We may feel fear, but we are not stopped by it, no longer pushed into doing something to avoid it or play along with it. We may shake and shudder as we proceed with our actions, but we proceed nonetheless, even if it means continuing only 1 more minute than we can stand. That's enough and exponentially useful until next time when we try again. This is a deeply self-compassionate way of practicing. 4. Finally, we adopt an affirmation that furthers our intention. I am learning to live with fear. I keep releasing myself from the grip of fear and feel better about myself. An affirmation makes the present practice a design for the future. We add loving kindness to our affirmation when we say, "May all beings who are afraid like me find this path." We include another physical element. While engaging in this practice, we are breathing into the fear, wherever it is in our body, and breathing out loving kindness from our heart with a soft smile. To feel fear but not act on it is paradoxical. Paradox is a quality of healing because it unites opposites rather than becoming stuck in a deadly either-or mentality. Fear will keep happening all through life. But by depriving fear of its ability to stop or drive us, it loses its power over us. We may still act with fear, but no longer because of it. We are now responsible for our fear rather than victims of it. We may feel shame or self-blame later when we notice that even though we're doing the practice faithfully, we are once again feeling fear. We then simply do the same as before. We breathe into wherever the shame is in our body and breathe out loving kindness from our heart with a soft smile. We are holding our feelings and releasing them in one single flowing circle. We are actually cradling the child who felt this fear and shame long ago. The difference between now and then is that this time there is someone reliable, ourselves in our healthy ego, who holds all we feel and releases it. If shame is an issue for us, therapy can help. In the meantime, we can take some beginner's steps into working with it. We recite these affirmations aloud. I am perfect in my imperfections. I am worthy of love and respect. I am enough. We imagine each of our parents or anyone important in our childhood saying the affirmations to us. You are perfect in your imperfections. You are worthy of love and respect. You are enough. We ask ourselves if either or both parents hesitated on any of the words or changed them. This helps us to see to what extent the shame we feel is inherited from childhood. Now, we imagine people who are important in our life right now speaking the affirmations to us. This helps us to see if the shame is being maintained in any of our relationships. Practice. Working with our fear of vulnerability. To love takes letting go of ego. This will mean being vulnerable, susceptible to being hurt, and being willing to admit we're hurting. Vulnerability also shows itself in ways like these, each a quality of lovability. We reveal our wounds, admit our failings, disclose our agendas and motivations. We show that we need someone rather than waiting for the other to show it to us first. We're willing to be seen at our best and worst without pretense or any attempts to hide who we are, all the way to the bottom. The list that follows expresses some inner worries of a person who feels closeness and its main ingredient, vulnerability. Notice that each statement is a sign of a lack of trust. A person who fears being vulnerable does so because she's been vulnerable before and it led to hurt. I am vulnerable and I know it because I've been wounded. What I fear is the repeat of another wounding. I don't want to be hit in the wounded place inside of me. You might hurt me or betray me if I open myself to you. I will lose my freedom if I let you get close. I can't be who you want me to be without losing myself. You might take over and engulf me. You might not like me if you see me up close, so I must keep up the facade. Some people are so wounded or carry so much trauma, they would tend not to put the vulnerable self-disclosures just listed into words. They fear that disclosing such doubts might invite derision or perhaps disturbing responses like these. Why do you say that? Sounds like you've had some really painful experiences at the hands of others. Care to elaborate? We might look at the list of worries and think there are reasons for the fear. I fear being vulnerable with you because you might engulf me, and so forth. Yet these are not really reasons, they are explanations. In reality, fear of closeness, fear of being vulnerable is a trust issue, as we heard before. Our personal bottom-line fear is not of being hurt, but of trusting ourselves. In fact, there's a double trust issue in a fear of vulnerability. We do not trust ourselves, we do not trust others. We do not trust ourselves to handle, that is, emotionally survive, the hurt, and the inevitable grief in its wake. We also do not trust others to respond in a caring way. I doubt you will hold me, warts and all, if I open myself to you. Will you judge me? Will you use what I show or share as weapons against me? A fear of being engulfed is often presented as the major issue in our fear of vulnerability. We fear being taken over, smothered by another's control, invasion, or obsession with us. As we contemplate more deeply, we might notice that we also fear engulfing ourselves. We fear that once someone invades our autonomy, strong feelings and reactions will arise, and they will engulf us. We fear self-engulfment as much or more as we fear engulfment by others. Likewise, a fear of being abandoned is part of the fear of vulnerability. Indeed, we fear being left alone, but the graver and more insidious terror is the prospect of being left alone with ourselves. How will we be able to tolerate life with just ourselves? We have abandoned ourselves so often and in so many ways. Will we do it again this time? That fear is much more overwhelming than someone walking out the door. Some of us were indeed controlled, smothered, engulfed, abandoned in childhood. Our fear of vulnerability in adult relationships is an example of the past still contaminating the present. In this instance, we are fearing a replay with a partner of what a parent did to us. We may also have been abused in childhood, and every cell in our bodies holds the trauma. So our fear of vulnerability has to be respected until therapy helps us work through it. It's usually a long process, certainly one to engage in before entry into an intimate relationship, because without prior work, we will remain ever on guard toward our partner, which is no fun for either of us. Fear of vulnerability ultimately refers to our fear of being human, like everyone else. We don't want to be seen as weak, unsure, ignorant, needy, or inadequate. But these are the givens of life for all of us. No one is exempt. No one is perfect or self-reliant all the time. In what we call fear of vulnerability is the terror of being seen as the wounded beings we are. As we heard before, a major fear is of our own inadequacy. We do not trust that we'll be able to take care of ourselves in a relationship with someone who tries to inhibit or control us. To work with that fear and self-distrust, we can learn and practice assertiveness, the art of self-expressiveness, and not allowing others to invade or keep trespassing on our boundaries. This work applies both to our distrust of ourselves and others. We learn to trust ourselves when we stand up for ourselves. We trust relating to others when they no longer have power over us because we have the power to stand up to them. We can make statements like these. I am becoming assertive enough to insist on not being controlled or inhibited by my partner. I will stand up for my freedom rather than live in fear of losing it. It is not acceptable for me to walk on eggshells or tiptoe around my partner. I need evidence that my partner is committed to giving me the A of allowing. I can no longer be in the business of getting someone to like me. I'm giving up the style of salesmanship. I am not like an insurance salesperson intent on promoting a product with seductive cajoling. I'm like a clerk at a warehouse store, simply escorting someone to what I offer. No frills, no dress up, just what I am as I am. Take it or leave it. I am saying yes unconditionally to the given of my inadequacies, not trying to hide them. At the same time, I am always open to feedback about how to move more and more into egoless relating. I am learning ways, including those on this list, to take care of myself, to tend my heart, so it can endure the hurts it has to hold in a world like this one, and to keep it loving nonetheless. I trust myself to do this, and will ask for help if and when I need it. Compassion for ourselves. Self-love is not a sin so vile a sin as self-neglecting. Shakespeare, Henry V. Our automatic, fallback, human reflex is to avoid what scares us. In self-compassion, we do the opposite. We do not turn away from our suffering as runaways, nor do we hold on to it as victims. We simply notice it and beam compassion upon it. Self-compassion is thus also a form of parenting ourselves. We can give to ourselves what our own parents did or did not give to us. When we stay with our fear or pain, we are staying with ourselves, both comforting and challenging ourselves, the very ingredients of good parenting. We trust ourselves more as we come to find out that we can live through our pain. Compassion for ourselves is also like good parenting because it means patience with our shortcomings. All of us, without exception, will find ourselves making mistakes or acting in unhealthy ways from time to time, even often. Self-compassion, in the form of self-forgiveness, frees us from the habit of shaming ourselves for not being perfect. Instead, we are granting ourselves leeway, making allowances for our limitations, giving up demanding perfection from ourselves. Paradoxically, such unconditional self-acceptance leads to healthy change, not to slacking off as it might seem to. Indeed, we only change because we do accept ourselves. This is because openness to ourselves creates a space in which our natural growth processes can flourish. All that we are awaits our compassion. Our compassion for ourselves is the necessary first step into the work of addressing, processing, and resolving our conflicts, both from the past and in the present. Compassion is the container in which healing happens. Then, all that we are can upgrade to what it is meant to be, because all has been held in caring compassion. Recently, at a weekend workshop at Esalen, as each person introduced himself or herself, I led the group in responding with one voice: all that you are is welcome here. That set the tone for the weekend, and I noticed a warmth and love coming through, one to another, by the end of the workshop. In fact, I can still recall the good feelings we shared. As an example of how compassion for ourselves works, we can look at how we sometimes feel needy. We might even do things to satisfy our neediness that we're not proud of later. Compassion happens when we hold ourselves with loving kindness toward all of this. We help that happen when we talk to ourselves this way. In a world like this one, where love and fulfillment are so hard to find, it's totally natural for me to feel needy. Thus, we don't blame ourselves. We are understanding toward ourselves. We see how natural it is to be the way we are in a world that is the way it is. This is how loving-kindness practice helps us become self-compassionate. We look at ourselves with mercy not judgment, with forgiveness, not disparagement. Gerard Manley Hopkins expressed self-compassion poignantly. My own heart, let me have more pity on. When we are self-compassionate, we are flexible in our assessments of ourselves. We no longer see our choices as all good or all bad. We realize that our life is more like a seesaw than a rocket. Damages leave scars, but self-compassion makes them no longer unsightly. Others' love of us can also help us have compassion toward ourselves. Mirror neurons are brain cells that are related to our imitating what we see. We thus automatically learn by example. We see how people love us, and we apply their style of loving us to loving ourselves. For example, we notice how patient they are with us, and we learn to be patient with ourselves. Many of us were taught that only a love of others is legitimate. Taking care of ourselves may feel, therefore, selfish. We may even feel we have to apologize for putting our own needs and boundaries first sometimes. In the following section, we'll hear how practice can be of help. Practicing self-compassion. A function of the self-help movement has been to point out what works and what doesn't work in our personal lives and in relationships. I employ this style in my own audiobooks. Unfortunately, in this kind of analysis, we may have come to feel ashamed of some very ordinary human feelings and experiences. We might have imagined that we're supposed to be on target with healthy reactions at all times and in all circumstances. Here are some examples of the dualisms that can result from the subtle shoulds in that excessive demand on ourselves. In the following pairs, the first represents an action or an attitude that is considered negative. The second represents the healthy alternative. Becoming attached to someone or something, the Buddhist definition of the cause of suffering. Relating to people and experiences with a relaxed grasp. Losing or not defending our boundaries. Establishing and maintaining our boundaries. Holding on, letting go. Becoming stuck, moving on. Craving, having desires that are appropriate to our status and goals in life. Being stopped or driven by fear. Showing courage even while afraid. Always wanting more. Being serenely contented with what we have or receive. Feeling needy. Having appropriate needs within intelligent limits. Continually seeking approval or feeling unworthy. Feeling self-approving and appreciative when others approve of us. Attempting to control others. Allowing others to make their own choices. Putting our mother's or father's face on a partner or anyone. Working through our transferences. Resenting, rejecting, or retaliating against those who hurt us. Saying ouch and trying to work things out. Staying too long in a relationship that doesn't work. Making a move when appropriate. Being ego-centered or selfish in how we make a decision. Letting go of ego to support connectedness and to show caring for others. Fighting the givens of life or expecting an exemption from the hard knocks. Accepting the givens of life, with all their blows and graces, with an unconditional yes. Taking things too seriously. Playfully finding the humor in ourselves, others, and life events. The negative attributes and actions just listed might make us feel ashamed of ourselves. The healthy alternatives usually make us feel proud of ourselves. We remain fully aware of the negative effects on our health and happiness because of our visits to the negative side. Our not denying the reality of the negative is what keeps self-compassion from becoming self-delusion. Our work, however, is only to keep committing ourselves to doing all we can to visit the healthy alternatives. If that effort also fails, our compassion is for our failures and limitations. We do not give up on ourselves. We simply start again, knowing that the sincerity of our intention is what matters most. This level of commitment is what keeps self-compassion from becoming self-pity. Talking to ourselves kindly. A simple way of showing ourselves compassion is to talk to ourselves with the kind of sentiments and words we would use to talk to the person we love unconditionally. This might be our child, a family member, or a friend. It might sound something like this. I know how hard it is to be kind to yourself when you make a mistake. We were all mostly trained to criticize ourselves, demanding of ourselves that we be perfect. But for now, allow yourself to appreciate your human limitations. You can do what it takes to make up for the mistake. You can commit yourself not to make the same mistake again. You have a lot on your mind, and it's understandable that you messed up this time. Next time can be better. Put it behind you and be kind to yourself by moving on. This is how self-compassion contributes to sanity and wholesomeness. Responding to the inner critic. We can use a journal to record our thoughts and feelings. We can use it to keep track of our work on the practices in this audiobook. We can also journal our responses to questions like these. What parts of me have I sent into exile out of shame? They have lively energy in them that I now want to capitalize on. How can I recall them and make them allies? I can use my healthy ego as a resource when I grant full hospitality to who I am. I can love myself by giving myself the 5 A's: attention, acceptance, appreciation, affection, and allowing. How am I giving each of these to myself? Who modeled giving them to me? How can I imitate that love both to myself and others? How can I be a cheerleader to myself? I may have missed out on secure attachment to my parents in childhood. Has this led me to be too independent or too needy and too dependent? The inner critic becomes louder for those who lacked early secure attachment and who sometimes become perfectionists. Has this happened to me? Self-criticism is painful. We can declare, I want to think the thoughts that do not lead to suffering, so I will make allowances for my failures and inadequacies. In addition, I will realize that I am not alone. Lots of people make the mistakes I do. Practicing mindfulness also helps us to be released from self-disparagement because it eliminates the judgment element in our thoughts. We then feel compassion for the fear behind our egotistical reactions, for the scared child behind our defenses. As a result, we value ourselves and feel stronger. This makes us more willing to be vulnerable in relationships because our sense of safety and security are now stably within ourselves. We have formed a secure attachment to ourselves. The end of compulsive seeking. Our goal as interrelated beings, however, is to continue wanting the 5 A's from others, but no longer to feel compelled to have them. Ego thrives on compulsion, expectation, and entitlement, so it cannot help us out of our neediness. As we let go of ego and trust what is inside us, we cease from compulsively seeking fulfillment from outside ourselves. My relationships are becoming healthier as I have more to look to within myself, while at the same time I need others too. The self-centered mindset cancels our chances for accompaniment. We might ask, is that what I want, or do I want connection? Can I hold a partnership without having to control or overtax it? Our life events have to become neutral, not full of stressful charge, a sign of ego taking over. Our goal is to keep choosing the gentle path, even though the brassy voice of ego does not quiet down fully. All that matters is that we don't act on ego anymore, or at least that we act on it less and less. Ego is in our amygdala and our cave ancestor genes, so it has no expiration date. We keep practicing, but we never arrive fully. It's the same as heading east, in which we never actually arrive at east. There's no final east, only more sun to rise. Ego is not a sin. Ego is not something that you get rid of. Ego is something that you befriend by not acting out or repressing all the feelings that you feel. Pema Chodron. Start where you are. Chapter 3. Healthy Ego and Egotism. We are constantly invited to be who we are. Henry David Thoreau. Winter, from the Journal of Henry D. Thoreau. We can distinguish between a healthy ego and egotism. The healthy ego sees how people operate and responds in a way that speaks up for itself, but then accepts how things play out. Healthy ego pride flourishes when we notice ego strengths in ourselves, integrity in our choices and actions, dedication to wholesome goals and ideals, loving kindness toward ourselves and others. The flourishing of these 3 features of a healthy personality in our daily lives gives us pride in ourselves. The unhealthy, grandiose ego becomes affronted and has to compete, prove its superiority, jockey for position, or retaliate to reset any imbalance it cannot tolerate. A big, that is, deformed, ego is like the beast in the story of Beauty and the Beast. Our healthy ego is the beauty, who appreciates the kernel of value in the egotistical mindset and works with it until the beautiful, true nature is exposed. That word shows the healthy fate of egotism. It has only to be exposed. Then it can be free to embrace its long-awaited, long-avoided destiny in the arms of the higher self. Only its long-standing fears and habit patterns stand in the way. Once we understand that the self, our true nature, wants us to make the leap, we realize that all that happens to us is an opportunity for awakening to our central purpose in life, opening the more than ego that we are. We can then say yes to the love our ego fears, but that our higher self is made of. The three-way ego. Goldilocks found Papa Bear's bed too hard, Mama Bear's bed too soft, and Baby Bear's bed just right. This is a metaphor for the three forms of ego. Sometimes it's too hard on people. This is the inflated ego, the egotist's style. Sometimes it's too soft in dealing with people. This is the deflated ego, the victim's style. Sometimes it's just right in relating to people. That is the style of a person with healthy pride and a firm but flexible sense of who he is to himself and others. The following set of values and attributes may help us see how our ego can be deficient or excessive. On this spectrum, we might also find ourselves anywhere in between the three sets of values. Not enough, which is the deflated ego, just right, which is the healthy ego, and too much, which is the inflated ego. Not enough, a deficient sense of self. Just right, a balanced sense of self. Too much, an exaggerated sense of self. Not enough, low self-esteem. Just right, appropriate self-esteem. Too much, low self-esteem but acting as if it were extremely high. Not enough, passivity and excessive dependence on a partner. Just right, mutual respect and a sense of equality in a relationship. Too much, inability to relate to a partner as an equal, only as a one-up. Not enough, loose boundaries. Just right, firm yet reasonably flexible boundaries. Too much, rigid boundaries. Not enough, placating, people-pleasing. Just right, assertive. Too much, demanding. Not enough, lets others take advantage. Just right, neither takes advantage nor lets others take advantage. Too much, takes advantage of others. Not enough, we are controlled by the reactions of others. Just right, we are in control of our reactions. Too much, we go out of control in how we react to others. The first set is not enough ego. We let others run roughshod over us. This represents a lack of ego strength. The third set is too much ego, what's called the big ego or egotism. In this position, we believe we're entitled to run roughshod over others. In the center is the healthy ego, our functional self that sets reasonable goals and pursues them intelligently. The healthy ego is appropriate in its dealings with others, respectful of boundaries, open to closeness. A way of seeing the difference among these three expressions of ego is to look at how people deal with conflicts. Two people get into a tiff, or one's upset by what the other one has said or done. The egotist, a person with an aggressively inflated ego, might deal with it by stony silence as he fumes. He might be direct and give the other person a tongue-lashing or show some form of aggression or reprisal. He will see a plan to reconcile as a form of weakness. His sense of self is so rigid that he would rather maintain his ego than his relationships. The egotist doesn't shepherd his relationships. He only disposes of them as soon as his grandiosity and entitlement are crossed or disregarded in any way. The victim, a person with a deflated ego, will cower, complain, or sulk. He will lick his wounds rather than find a healing for them. Instead of trying to work things out, he will see what has happened as all part of a pattern of abuse. The abuse, in fact, is what he expects, and it is familiar to him. This latest example simply confirms his sense of himself as a victim. His self-esteem thereby keeps diminishing. All this gives him permission for negative feelings about himself and other people. The victim ego has a sense of self that's so impoverished that it would rather maintain a negative self-image than build it back up. The victim doesn't shepherd his relationships in ways that help him find support and thereby build his self-esteem. Neither the egotist nor the victim resolve anything. Their purpose, in fact, is not resolution, but reaction in character. That is, reaction in accord with their mindset. Their image of themselves is more important than working something out with another person. This is because their sense of self is not strong and established. They have nothing going for them but their egos, one too hard, the other too soft. The person with a healthy ego responds to conflict by making choices meant to lead to resolution. She will approach the topic directly, not in a blaming way, but in a let's look at this together way. This will open the door for both parties to express feelings, each taking responsibility for his or her own. A person with a well-put-together ego will look for a win-win solution, even when this means admitting he was wrong. He will find a way to resolve a conflict as long as the other person is agreeable. The result is no further resentment and better communication in the future. A healthy ego shepherds the continuation of connections. The expression, taking things personally, shows us one other way to see the differences among the three styles of ego. Someone snubs or insults us. With the big ego, we're in a huff and snap back with a sharp, equally insulting reproof, or with a passive payback. Afterward, we hold a grudge. With a deflated ego, we are hurt and wounded. What has happened confirms to us that we are unworthy and unimportant. We might keep going back for more in the future, or walk on eggshells around the one who put us down. With a healthy ego, we do not take things personally, yet what happens is not water off a duck's back either. We speak up assertively, saying, ouch, or no more of that. In the future, we avoid those who do not treat us with respect. Finally, we can summarize the three forms of ego by noticing how they stand when it comes to finding our own voice and exercising our power. Inflated ego. Aggressiveness and defensiveness lead to misusing power, so it becomes controlling of others. Deflated ego. Passivity means we give our power to others, who might then use it over us. Assertiveness, the style of the healthy ego. Here we have power, but use it for, not over. Now we'll look at each of these three forms of ego in detail. First, we consider the inflated ego and its extreme expression in narcissism. Then we explore the deflated ego, and finally, the healthy ego. All puffed up. An allergic response overprotects us. Our body reacts to a minor stressor with too much histamine. It goes so far to defend us that it winds up making us uncomfortable. This is like the reactions of an egotist. But now, it's not our nasal passages that are stressed, it's our chance to love and be loved. We are ready at the slightest provocation to act in two characteristic ways, aggressively and defensively. Ego, like a boxer, has two fighting hands, one for defense and one for offense. The haughty ego carries a sword and a shield. The sword is for attack, the shield is for defense. The alternative is sitting like Sitting Bull. He neither defends nor attacks, but simply listens to the brash or cautious voices around him. Then he makes a strong but quiet gesture to show his wise and crowd-silencing decision. Here's a quick description of the differences between an arrogant ego and a personable ego. We can try to move from one to the other, from overblown and inflated to appropriate and honest in its self-presentation, from arrogant to proud but not conceited, from caught in illusion to grounded in reality, from compelled to react to free to respond, from self-centered to other-conscious, from retaliatory and punitive to the ability to show anger without being vengeful, from entitled and privileged to assertive about stating and maintaining appropriate rights, from fear-based to love-impelled. People will not like us when we act in the ways described first. People won't want to be with us when we come at them with ego impudence. I was in the financial section of San Francisco recently and saw these words on an advertising poster. With our program, you can learn how to make lots of money and not be a jerk that nobody likes. I thought to myself, that can be applied to how people see us when our ego flares up at them. The following scenario demonstrates the difference between responses from the inflated ego or from a healthy one. The big ego, that is, the egotist, sees that the plumber didn't fix the sink problem completely. Already upset at what he considers an exorbitant price and the inadequacy of the work, big ego thinks, he's not going to get away with this. He calls the plumber but gets the answering machine. He leaves a message but receives no callback. Now, big ego feels not only cheated but disrespected. Ego has entered the story, so treating the issue rationally is not on the table. The egotist thinks, the costly job was not done properly, and the plumber is refusing to call me back. How dare he treat me this way? I'll show him whom he's dealing with. Big ego finds ways to get back at the plumber. He also feels adrenaline in his system, causing stress that makes him less in contact with his rational faculties. When the arrogant ego mindset, egotism, is incensed, it occludes intelligent judgment, moral consciousness, and compassion. Healthy ego has the same experience with a plumber, but questions the price immediately and directly. When the reason for the price is explained, he can see it makes sense, or, if it doesn't, he tries to negotiate. When the work turns out to be shoddy, he calls to state his view. If there's no callback, he figures that he's meeting up with the given of life that some people are not reliable. He does all he can to gain a hearing. When that fails, he may put a review in an online site about choosing a plumber in his area. He doesn't do this because he wants to get back at the plumber. His motive is to warn other people about the possibility of disappointment in the work. Ultimately, brash, big ego reactions are theater. The big ego uses posturing just as actors do. This style doesn't work in life with others, in relationships, in our loving connections. With healthy self-esteem, we sometimes won't back down and sometimes will. To describe the alternative humorously, we can say that the egotist won't truckle, buckle, or knuckle under. We keep in mind that the big ego, our own, is a con artist tricking us continually. We have to remain alert to the innumerable ploys by which the ego can insert itself into our thoughts, choices, behaviors, and relationships. It is always looking for ways to reinforce its hegemony over every chapter and character in our life story. Egocentredness, by the way, is found in the best intentions and motivations of the most healthy people. Our work is to notice it mindfully, with compassion, and without being compelled to act on it. The inflated ego can be reduced to a healthy size by a combination of psychological work on ourselves and spiritual practice such as mindfulness and loving kindness. It usually requires a grace to find the enthusiasm for such a process. The healthy side of ego has always been in us, potentially, but it needs to be awakened, and it loves to have that happen. Psychological work takes time. Enlightenment or conversion can happen in a moment. Ego is a life sentence unless we parole ourselves by our commitment to spiritual practices. However, ego can make anything its playground, even spiritual practices. This happens when our engaging in them becomes a showing off of how advanced we are compared to others. When practices are sincere, we appreciate the power of grace that has appeared in our lives. We know we are truly progressing when we feel gratitude instead of vanity. We know our ego is loosening its grip when we no longer seek power, only caring connection, which is a definition of love. Finally, we may look more deeply at the fact that the inflated ego shows itself not only in the individual, but in the collective. The tribal ego can fuel prejudices that seek to eliminate those we dislike. War is the supreme and tragic example of such a scenario. Every year, we see how egotism underwrites the tribalism and triumphalism that make atrocities seem legitimate. In the course of history, we have seen tyrannical, ego-driven leaders. They may convince people of the legitimacy of genocide, war, terrorism, and torture to keep the national ego intact. They, like gang members or street thugs, see negotiation and compromise as weakness. They have no guilt about their atrocities, since they see them as justified by the validity of their cause. Shakespeare refers to this style in Julius Caesar. The abuse of greatness is when it disjoins remorse from power. The sad, dangerous, and discouraging element in all this is that such tyrants are supported by the populace long enough for them to do terrible and lasting damage. This is collective egotism at work, and at its worst. It's the dark side of our humanity. As long as ego is still trying to be on top, we will disconnect from our collective values. For instance, we will fail to notice the interdependent nature of ecology, our greed and voracious consumption of resources so that growth economies can thrive is an example of the lethal results of ego-driven choices. The alternative is a healthy autonomy, which leads to interconnection. Now we're not like isolated individuals, but like cells that give and receive continually for the good of the whole body. This is the universal calling to let go of egotism in favor of universal love. Its fulfillment has appeared to us in such shining ways in people like Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, Aung San Suu Kyi. We recall the Metta Sutra. Cultivate an all-embracing mind of love for all throughout the universe in all its height, depth, and breadth, a love that is untroubled and beyond hatred or enmity. Translation from Acharya Buddharakkhita. A tribal ego can propagate from something totally innocent. The other day I heard an anthem, Michigan, My Michigan, which praised that state with fervent, heart-swelling pride. The song hyperbolizes Michigan as superior to the other 49 states. I sing a state of all the best. Once we let go of an ego orientation, we shrug and smile at such ranking. Instead, we compose a song that sees our own home state, school, religion, or team as a metaphor of the entire world. Then, our legitimate cherishing of our Michigan helps us cherish the entire planet that sustains it. Loving-kindness practice in Buddhism has shown us that the first focus of our affection, ourselves, has to open to full collective focus, concern for all beings. We move from microcosmic love to macrocosmic love. This is how our love of what is ours helps us not only have a healthy ego, but a spiritually aware one. That is certainly something to be proud of and salute. Our world is like a jigsaw puzzle. Each person is equally necessary because each represents one piece of the puzzle. No piece ranks above another, no matter how small it is, or how little color it has, or how lacking in appeal it may be. Our psycho-spiritual work is twofold in a similar way. First, we become individuals like the puzzle pieces, which are unique and have special meaning in a larger context. Then, we seek to be connected, as in putting the puzzle